During a debate about the Biden-Harris economy compared to the Trump economy, a prominent MAGA news host received brutal back-to-back fact checks, not only from President Biden's own Commerce Secretary, but also his own co-host on live TV. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we got a clip to show you here. It's a lot of fun. Joe Kernen is the Trump-supporting MAGA co-host of the Squawk Box on CNBC. And CNBC tends to take a more pro-corporate, pro-stock market, pro-business sector, conservative-style approach to the economy, okay? And Joe Kernen has featured in multiple videos of ours, most recently when billionaire investor and prominent Harris supporter Mark Cuban came on to the Squawk Box also to spar with Joe Kernen. So he gets humiliated on a regular basis. It's hard being a Trump supporter in 2024 and getting into a factual debate. Well, unfortunately for Kernen, he got hit with it twice because he made the mistake of sparring with the much more intelligent Secretary of Commerce under President Biden, Gina Raimondo, and then got shut down by his own co-host. And the whole thing happened in about a 2-minute spread, and it's hilarious. And we have to talk about it, but first let's play the clip, and then we'll unpack it.
When we've had surrogates on for the Trump campaign, they have said that he doesn't really mean any of these things. They would just be tools for negotiation.
Then why does he say them? Why would I believe that? He says it. He's doubled down on it. He repeats it. By the way, he was president. We know what that resulted in. Massive deficits.
Seems like you kind of forgot that earlier. Yeah, and the tariffs that he did put on were continued by the Biden administration. There was no recession. Real wages were actually up. Stock market did well. A lot of very positive things happened. Record low unemployment until the pandemic. So it's just weird to act like it's a complete wild card what kind of president he would be when you've got a blueprint right there of what kind of president he would be. And Kamala Harris has been vice president for 4 years, and we've seen exactly what kind of vice president she would be.
Right. What have you seen? You've seen more manufacturing in this country since any time since World War II.
I've seen real wages go down. I've seen, crime.
That's not true.
What's not true?
I just don't agree with that.
Real weekly wages have gone down. Average weekly wages are still down from when Biden came into office.
When Biden came into office, we saw sky-high unemployment, sky-high
pandemic, but
inflation.
Prior to that, but before the pandemic, it was 3 points.
You can't discount the Trump administration. You can't say the economy was great during the Trump administration
until the pandemic.
If you somehow exclude the pandemic, and then turn around
if you want to do the pandemic, fine. But prior to that, the economic policies resulted in a very good economy.
But then you can't then say, well, the economy was somehow terrible during the Biden administration and pretend the pandemic didn't happen.
Part of the inflation that caused real wages to be down is from the pandemic, but piling on all the stimulus and all the spending is what really exacerbated that situation. We've seen both presidents.
None of those things were related to the pandemic.
I just don't think you can say it's going to immediately be a recession when that didn't happen the first time.
Secretary?
So what I love about that exchange is Kernen got really cocky and he was really condescending. He interrupted the secretary multiple times. Then when Andrew Ross Sorkin, his co-host, jumped in and pointed out the hypocrisy, then he backed off. Well, I'm just saying, okay, fine, maybe we can count the pandemic. I'm just saying that, we can't just say that there's going to be an automatic recession simply because, Donald Trump's policies are recessionary and inflationary according to like 99% of macroeconomists. You see how the posture changed somewhat? So let's just address a couple of things. What was emphasized there was the hypocrisy. Okay, well, actually, first, let's deal with the first part with Secretary Raimondo. So what Joe Kernen wants you to believe is that the Trump administration's economic record was objectively good, that the Biden-Harris economic record was objectively bad. Both of these things are false, okay? It's also important to remember that Donald Trump inherited a good economy from Barack Obama. Okay, President Obama took his two terms, to lead us out of a relatively slow recovery, but it was a recovery nonetheless spread across 2 terms of the recession that was triggered under the Bush administration, the previous Republican administration. It took 8 years to get us out of that mess. When Obama left office, he handed Donald Trump an economy firing on all cylinders. And as a matter of fact, For the most part, the macroeconomic trends which were positive under the Trump administration were mere continuations of Obama-era trends. Joe Kernen wants you to forget all that. Joe Kernen wants you to believe that on January 20th, 2017, when Donald Trump was inaugurated, there was no economy, none whatsoever, not a bad or a good economy. Donald Trump just stepped in and rubbed his hands together and created the U.S. economy out of thin air. That's not what happened. So it's incredibly dishonest for Kernen to omit that fact that Donald Trump, all he had to do was keep Obama-era economic trends continuing, which Trump did for the most part. Some macroeconomic trends, I will say, prior to the pandemic actually decreased, including, for example, average monthly job growth. The last 3 years of the Obama administration had higher monthly job creation numbers than the 3 years under the Trump administration. It's just a fact, okay? Then the pandemic occurred, and Donald Trump horribly mismanaged the pandemic. And we have no reason to believe that if the shoe was on the other foot, that Joe Kernen would give President Biden a pass or President Obama a pass. Imagine it had been a Democrat who had been in office during COVID. Would Joe Kernen say, well, you can't blame that person for the pandemic? Or would he say, as the nation's chief executive, you have a responsibility to manage crises and do it to the best of your ability. And if the economy tanks on your watch during a pandemic, well, that's also kind of your fault because you signed up for this job. That's what Andrew Ross Sorkin was getting at. Like, wait a minute. If you want to grade Trump on a curve because of the pandemic, you can't simultaneously grade Biden more harshly because of the pandemic, right? You can't have it both ways, or at least you can't do it honestly. You can't say, don't count the pandemic against Trump, even though it happened on his watch, but you must count the pandemic against Biden, who led us through the recovery. We don't know what the economy would look like now if President Biden had inherited a good economy from Donald Trump, the way that Donald Trump inherited a good economy from Barack Obama, because unfortunately for the Democratic Party and really the country, most recent economic U.S. history, modern U.S. economic history, is Democrats coming into office to clean up the messes left for them by Republican presidents. Bill Clinton had to clean up the messes left for him by a Republican president. President Obama had to clean up the messes left for him by a Republican president. President Biden had to clean up the messes left for him by a Republican president. That's usually what happens. 10 out of the last 11 recessions began under Republican administrations, another uncomfortable statistic for Joe Kernen. As far as Trump's policies are concerned, again, it's macroeconomists and financial firms like Moody's Analytics and others, Goldman Sachs, saying that Trump's economic proposals are inflationary. They are recessionary. Take it up with them. Now, you can say, well, Trump might get lucky and we might enter the 99th timeline out of 100 in which they miraculously don't trigger inflation or recession. But that's really not a compelling argument that he might get lucky. He's playing Russian roulette, number one. Number two, again, would you be adopting this rhetoric, Joe Kernen, if it had been Vice President Harris or President Biden who proposed inflationary or recessionary policies? And what's interesting, too, is when pressed on it, Kernen again kind of backs down. He's like, okay, well, at least some of the economic issues that we have are from the pandemic. But what about the stimulus? Well, the stimulus was a consequence of the pandemic. The stimulus wasn't created on its own. It's not like Donald Trump passed two sweeping bipartisan COVID stimulus bills, the CARES Act and the HEROES Act. On his watch, he passed COVID stimulus because even Trump recognized that stimulus was necessary. He may have been doing it for sheer cynical political reasons during an election year, but he did pass it. President Biden passed one stimulus bill, the American Rescue Plan. But that was also as a consequence of COVID. It's not like he came into office, the economy was thrumming, and he goes, hell yeah, let's just give Americans $1,400 for no reason. You see what I'm saying? Joe Kernen, in real time there, moved the goalposts and employed really gratuitous double standards. He also tried to suggest that, the unemployment rate was at a record low under Trump. That's true, except Biden beat that record. Unemployment is better under President Biden than it ever was under Donald Trump, pre or post COVID. It just is. So I just love that in real time where he disintegrates, but the hypocrisy there is exposed. Republicans and MAGA Republicans like Joe Kernen do not want you to hold COVID against Donald Trump, but all they do is hold COVID, which began under Trump, against President Biden. It's so strange. Don't blame this person for making the mess or not cleaning it up in their time. Blame it for the person who followed them, who had to clean up the mess, for not doing it perfectly. That makes no sense. Imagine Joe Kernen and I are standing in Joe Kernen's kitchen and I knock over a glass of milk. Or my glass of milk is knocked over and I don't clean it up, would we turn and then blame somebody else? Hey, it's actually somebody else's fault for not cleaning up my glass of milk, which was knocked over. It doesn't make any sense. But this is what MAGA Republicans do because they know they can't defend Donald Trump if they impose the same standard on Trump as Biden. If you hold Democrats and MAGA Republicans to the same standard, MAGA Republicans always lose. And that puts Trump supporters like Joe Kernen in the unenviable position of either admitting, yeah, Trump sucks, and the Biden-Harris record's actually pretty damn good, all things considered. Record low unemployment, stock markets, which constantly break records, low unemployment for minorities and women and, small business startups, which are booming, record high labor force participation in prime labor participation, like prime workers compared to the past 20 or 30 years. One thing after another, GDP growth is higher under the Biden administration than it ever was under the Trump administration. And that's even if you control for COVID. All of these accomplishments, it's pretty damn good, all things considered, especially when you compare us to other advanced economies. Under the Trump administration, China was scheduled to surpass us. It was predicted to surpass us under our current economic trajectory compared to China's. Now China is lagging behind. Joe Kernen doesn't want you to think about all that. Instead, he wants to get condescending with the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and then he has to backpedal in real time when hit with back-to-back fact checks. Pretty funny stuff. Love to see it. They just can't do this very well. They can't honestly defend Donald Trump compared to the record of the Democratic Party, and they're hoping you don't notice. But we did, Joe. We did. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.